The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people were evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spend a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. Still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, a group would just jump in and help out. It was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
We are the Hawaiian Volcano Education and Resilience Institute, HVRI for short. A lot of people know us from the 2018 eruption of Kīlauea in the Lower East Rift Zone. Working under Hawaii Tracker on the Facebook group. Since then, we've been trying to carry on and take the lessons, the hard lessons that were learned during that eruption and try and prepare for the next major disaster that comes to our island.
Yeah, and so we do that through two different programs. One is volcano education, and the other part is digital resilience, which we address through online groups on social media. So the way the two programs work together is that the social media networks end up being a distribution pathway for all the information. And having that network in place means we can provide more than just volcano education, but any other preparedness information as well.
What we were working for really came about in the Mauna Loa eruption in 2022. Within hours of that eruption starting, we had the mayor, Mitch Roth, we had USGS-HVO Ken Hahn on the stream trying to help flush out a little bit of the ongoing because it's so new. It's completely different from our previous major eruption, which was 2018.
One of the things that Talmadge and I were talking about was how do we deal with social media? And it was something we needed to figure out and get right. Our job is to get information to the public and make sure that the public get it as well as possible and as correctly as possible. When Philip and Dan started coming to and live streaming the meetings, it was great because we were reaching more people than we normally would. So when the eruption actually happened, we had this relationship. The interviews we did during the eruption, the most fun ones were the ones with Philip and Dave because they were more relaxed and we knew we were getting to the local community and people were asking questions. So those were the best, I think. I just want to really give a shout out to those guys and how we worked as a team on this eruption. It really worked out well and we got to a lot of people we wouldn't have normally gotten.
Aloha, everyone. Welcome to our Hawaiian Volcano Tracker for February 6th, 2026. We are HVRI, the nonprofit Hawaiian Volcano Education and Resilience Institute. I'm geologist Philip Ong, joined by Mr. Lou Atori here today. How are you doing, Lou? How's your last
pretty
weekend?
good. Doing pretty good. Here we are. I missed you guys last week because I was up top doing the last episode of Volcano Awareness Month. And Yeah, we have a lot to talk about. I mean, I'm the whole episode 41 you guys covered that Dane and I caught on the highway, and now we're about to roll in a whole nother episode 42 plus weather happening and VOG. You got a lot to talk about tonight. So been good on mine.
Yeah, and we're going to show the presentation you recorded last week as well at the
That's
back
right.
of our broadcast
Yes.
today. Yeah, so yeah, that's our menu today. What's been happening since 41, what's coming up to 42, and that presentation.
Yeah, I think you guys are going to really like the presentation that I recorded last week with Professor Lis from Hilo, Volcanology 101. It was the second one that I did with Volcano Awareness Month with a professor from Hilo, and they were really good. Not that any were bad in the last couple years, but these were really good presentations. So I hope you guys enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so yeah, stick around for that if you can, or catch us on the replay. And in any case, Lou will be leading discussion in chat. As usual, we're missing Dane tonight. He is giving another presentation elsewhere. So good luck to him as well. So, all right. Anything else, Lou, before we get into it?
Nope, all good. Hit it.
All right. Let's switch our screen around. Let's get the right tags on here. And all right. Aloha, everyone. This is our Hawaiian volcano summary for February 5th, 2026. Following episode 41 of Kīlauea's ongoing summit eruption, activity has been paused for about 12 days as the volcano recharges for its next round, which is currently expected in another week or so around Valentine's Day. We're looking at the live camera from V3, showing active degassing of both the north and south vents of Kīlauea during this pause. But if we look back over the past week from the V3 camera at the nighttime views, you can see we've had sporadic glow and occasional flaming reported by the USGS from both vents there. So not a whole lot of action, pretty quiet there. During the daytime, the views are more like this. Lots of fog blowing throughout the national park with variable and light winds in the area and making observation more difficult because of that. So we rely on monitoring signals, as we often do, but more so during times like this. And you can see here from the ground tilt meter that the volcano has been recharging following the deflation of episode 41. Have not quite got to the threshold that we expect for 42. And according to the USGS's most recent models, based on current rates of inflation, the forecast for the onset of episode 42 lava fountaining is between February 11th and 16th. So that's the next window there. Just to remind you, all this activity has been occurring within Hawaii Volcanoes National Park in Kīlauea caldera in Halema'uma'u crater. You see the footprint of the eruption here through 13 months. But that does not mean that there haven't been impacts outside of the park. This photograph from the Mauna Kea camera from last week is capturing the very high ash and tephra cloud that blew to the east over many communities in Hawaii Island, depositing tephra and Pele's hairs across the area mapped here by the USGS last week. So currently we are still dealing with VOG. Here is the VMAP project's VOG forecast, looking at the sulfate aerosol particles as they fly from Kīlauea volcano and are spread by these light and variable trade winds all across Hawaii Island. You can see over the next 48 hours, the winds blow this orange and yellow splotchy areas across much of the island here. If we look at our current readings with the Purple Air Citizen Science Monitoring Network, you can see that there are some high values very spottily around the volcano area, but also widespread elevated particulate concentrations along the Kona coast and north as well, many places, even Pahala down here in the south. Because of this recent impact of the tephra, many people are wondering what episode 42 will bring, especially with the weather. So looking at the National Weather Service's forecast, the most important thing to note is that the weather pattern will change dramatically Friday night and over the weekend across the state of Hawaii, with a weather front advancing through the state, bringing wetter and winter conditions to the islands. This is expected to reach Hawaii Island towards the end of the weekend and perhaps bring some heavy rain that might help volcano residents clean up who are still digging out from that tephra and ashfall. Looking at earthquakes, here's a map for the past week. We have continuing events on the south flank and the Pahala source zone. Some earthquakes are happening around the summit, but they're much smaller and less in number as well, as you can see here. So here's the monitoring data for the last week on Kīlauea. Earthquakes per day look fairly steady here, maybe a slight drop off over the last week or so. And you can see in the depth versus time plot that actually the magnitudes of these earthquakes has also shrunk quite a bit within this last week. So it's not quite clear what this means as the volcano is recharging to 42, but as before, there are many possibilities, most likely of which is a resumption of the eruption through fountaining from the existing vents. Now turning to Mauna Loa, monthly update's been released for February by the USGS. The volcano remains at alert level normal in green. It had increased earthquakes over the past month, but that has reduced here in the last few weeks as well. Most interesting is that the refilling of the summit reservoir system has fluctuated between the central caldera and the south caldera region over the past few months, leading to some deviations in the reading of distance between the two stations across Kīlauea, Mauna Loa caldera, Mokua Veo Veo Veo. So when that's what you see here is a shift to the south caldera there, and then returning to the center there. So that's the most interesting thing is Mauna Loa continues her long-term trend of refilling following its eruption. Nowhere close to the next one yet. As you can see here, our earthquakes per month for the past 5 years are still quite low and nothing compared to what we saw in the years ahead of the eruption. And that's our Hawaii volcano summary for this week. Okay, so let's jump to our hazard summary, which is the gas and the tephra, as we now all know. But the gas is carrying a tephra around, so it's the thing to focus on here for us. And we'll start with the V1 camera, just the daytime views over the last week. And what you mostly see is the fog blowing all over the place, including across the face of the camera here, where it's hard to track what's happening day to day because of that. This would be a theme. This is a theme for the month, for the year so far, as is typical in the winter runs with our slack winds. And hopefully we'll have that forecast be correct and have some weather come clear some of this out here within the next few days. This is a V2 camera from further away, so maybe more of a view of what the visitor to the national park might see. And as you can see, also heavily impacted by the shifting winds and fog around. Here's the V3, perhaps the clearest view because it's normally in a more downwind direction. Normally the wind blows in the trade winds, the gas in this direction. So whenever it's going not there, that's our light and variable winds. And you can see it's really dancing all around there over the past week during the daytime. So that's your V3 camera. Let's look at a wider view, the KW camera. And the vents are on the right, and you can see lots of fuming spots on the crater floor. Remember, this is all recent flows, and there's lava injecting beneath the crust here. And all of that produces heat and gas. And so you can see the gas from those spots as well, dancing in those variable winds too. Across the caldera at the B1 camera, here is a view in the daytime as well. So trade winds normally blow this over in that direction. We have overlooks in the national park around here and over here and over here and over here. So you can see the fog really blowing across many of those areas, impacting visitation during the last few days, including today, as we'll see here shortly. So turning to the VOG measurement and prediction program from the University of Hawaiʻi, Manoa, this is the VMAP. Their forecast dashboard offers two buttons, one for the pure sulfur dioxide emissions from the volcano, which you can see are concentrating north of Kīlauea to the Hilo area, but also southwest, as it typically go towards Ocean View, Pahala, Na'alehu as well there. So that's the pure component as it comes out of the volcano, which reacts in the atmosphere with water aided by the presence of sunlight and produces these sulfate aerosol particles, which you can see now last longer and they disperse further from the source. And that's what you see here over the next 48 hours or so. You can see stuff's blowing all around, and this approaching front is doing some funny things with this wind direction as well. So looking at our maps, we'll start with the state of Hawaii air quality data map. And as last week, we were seeing elevated values as far as Maui, and we actually had someone in the chat last week report from Maui that that was actually VOG that they were experiencing over there. So perhaps that's what's going on here today. If you're in the chat again, let us know, our Maui viewers. Otherwise, on the state map, we're seeing all greens, although some elevated numbers across the stations. You can see there's not very many stations. And so for that reason, we like to check multiple sources, including what has the most sources here is our Purple Air Citizen Science Network, where any citizen can buy a weather station and connect it to the internet. And there you can see some elevated values all across. So this station that's north of Kīlauea at Kulani, you can see is one that often gets this VOG during the southerly winds. And you see here a little bit of a history of the concentrations of gas at that site. It hasn't quite reached into the red here, but you can see it's gone through the yellow quite a bit in the last little while. That's just one station. Let's go over here to, let's zoom it in and come to the, everything looks pretty green. There's even a 0 over here at the visitor center, but maybe that's because it's offline. I don't know, but let's come over here to Uekahuna. And there you can see that the history is showing we've actually gone through yellows. Let's see if I can get this box to disappear. There we go. Through the yellows to the red and into the purple today on the purple air scale right there. Right, so you can see it's been. You can see it comes and goes and comes and goes multiple times in a short period of time. But it certainly can be very impactful, especially if you have any respiratory sensitivities. So that's a little bit of the impact there. We can go south, Pahala, for example, and look at what the stations down there have experienced over time. And so there you can see some of that into the yellow up and down. And now let's go to up one station up here. Let's just do one in Hilo and see what that looks like. And so not as bad, but certainly climbing into the yellow and even into this orange threshold right there from time to time. So watch out for the VOG. It's still our biggest impact for sure. And where the VOG goes, tephra may follow. And that's why it's important for us to look at the weather forecast coming up. But before we do that, let's look closer to the national park. They also have their own air quality page. Here is their current summary with everything right now showing in the green in a national park and downwind on the south and southwest coast of the island. The current wind speed here is very slow to almost none, 1 meter per second, 2 miles an hour. It's very still out there. So these conditions could change quickly. We can go to their charts to look at the history at all these areas, right? So here is the Art Center, experienced a brief period of SO2 earlier today in the early morning. At the Uekahuna site, you can see we've been in a red for a couple hours period right there. So that would be something that would prompt an alert from the National Park Service, as Lou mentioned he saw earlier today. So there it is. There's that site. Look, unhealthy between, looks like around 1:30 all the way till 3:30 or so this afternoon. And coming and going here, another spike at 4:30 as well. So SO2, but also particulate matter, which spiked a little bit more so in the later hours there. These are only hour-long buckets in this case. Everywhere else on this is in the green, apart from the steam vents, which also in that direction downwind is showing occasional SO2 spikes as well. So certainly follow park guidance if you're there. If you're not seeing any guidance and you especially have sensitivities, go and find someone to talk to, because it's important that you keep yourself safe. This is the biggest hazard right now for people in the park. All right, and so that said, let's one last gas view here. We'll look at the Mounts satellite, which is capturing SO2 from space. And so here is the most recent capture from the 4th, showing VOG blowing to the northeast. Yesterday, it was more pooling and covering this whole southeast part of the island. The day before that, it was back to the north. The day before that, it was more dispersed, but more so to the west. Before that, more dispersed. pooling all around. Oh, let's get us back here. And there to the southwest again. So in sequence, looks something like this. And so you see it really is flopping around all around the southern part of the island, primarily here. Okay, so then going to the National Weather Service here, to our area forecast discussion. We mentioned before that they expect light, predominantly southern winds through early Friday. This is a state synopsis. The weather pattern will change dramatically Friday night and over the weekend as a frontal boundary advances through the state, bringing wetter and windier conditions to the islands. Periods of heavy rain, isolated thunderstorms, and strong winds will then persist through early next week. A drier air mass will move over the state around the middle of next week. However, isolated showers associated with the trade wind flow will persist. So that's the most important thing there. As of right now, they currently expect the trade winds to persist through past the middle of next week, which is about the window of when episode 42 is going to arrive. And so that's our biggest hope right now. We'll have to keep an eye on this. Forecasts can change, of course. But given the impact that everyone just had with episode 41, I'm sure there's a lot more anxiety out there. Everyone I talked to out in the field is saying that they're more worried than before. This is going to happen again. Yeah, you heard similar, Lou? Talking to people out there.
Yeah, that's definitely the talk that's out there. We were up there on Sunday and early Monday morning and vogged out. And I just was talking about this with some others as well. We thought we had our peak Kona low wind come through with that 50-mile-an-hour gust that happened last week. And we kind of, even though we had this massive amount of tephra that came through, overall damage wasn't compared to last year's 80-mile-an-hour gust that came through. But it doesn't look like we're out of the wind, so to speak, yet. When we were up there at the park, we were standing there just shooting some video and looking around, and I started noticing the tephra that was on the vehicles in the parking lot. We were at Kīlauea overlook, and I just was, the first thought was, there's no way that tephra had been on there for a week. And then the wind gust came and it was still blowing the tephra out of the trees. So it's a combination of episode 42 could put us in that same situation again. And there's still tephra and Pele's hair all in the trees up there. So the wind is a major issue right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So looking a little further into the forecast here, so we know a little more to expect. That front is forecast to reach Kauai Friday afternoon or evening, and then slow as it works its way down the island chain over the weekend. So we've heard from our contributors that Hawaii Island might be Sunday night with a first rain arriving, and perhaps the heavy rain coming on Monday and lasting into Tuesday, something like that. It's weather. We're not weather forecasters. We're just reporting their best guesses at this point. So take that as you will, right? But we have seen this pattern of weather fronts coming down from the north during the winter months just about every year, right? So that's what we get. And so we know a little bit more what to expect. It does say here that the front will begin to stall in the vicinity of Maui County. And so that puts into question, if it comes all the way across us, that's when we usually get the strongest winds, right? So we'll see what the forecast evolves, if it's going to actually stall, and what that might affect that later part of the period there, as far as more variable weather, or if it allows the trade winds to stick around. That's the most important thing here. So if we look at the actual imagery, here is the GOES 18 channel 13, the animation from Mauna Kea Weather Center. So here we are, and here is that front that has this flow that's from southwest and northeast, but the whole front itself actually marches down to the southeast and comes across island chain. So it'll kind of work its way there, then there, and we'll maybe stall around here, and then it's so big, you see, of course, that it's going to have effects over Hawaii Island regardless. So that's what we're looking at. And that's the most important thing in combination with episode 42 at this point in time, given the most recent impact. So if we look at the easy version here, there's a 7-day detailed forecast, right? What's most important is the winds, south-southwest today and tonight, west on Friday. On Saturday, they are saying light and variable wind becoming east in the afternoon. That's the change over right there, right? north-northeast wind by Saturday night, northeast wind on Sunday, northeast wind on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday as far as the forecast goes out. So that's the best we could hope for, but we'll have to wait and see because, our window goes past Wednesday, and so you never really know what's going to happen there. But that's the most we can share as far as our main hazard, the gas and the tephra and the recent impact that's had on people here. So, yes.
Yeah, I do have a update from the park on that VOG at Waikahuna. If I can jump on your screen real quick there. Can you zoom that in? Can I bring this in a little bit? I can't bring that in, can I? I'm just going to read it to you. Due to light, this is 1 hour ago from the park. Due to light winds, we're at red. It was like Phil was saying, visitors should monitor park-wide air quality. Everything is open up there, but there are areas with green good area, including sites along Crater Rim Drive, East and Chain of Craters Road. Park staff could temporarily close areas for everyone's safety. So just be aware that if you're up there, that they could close it at any time. But from what the park is saying right now, everything is still open. They're just in full monitoring mode.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Lou. Timely addition here. All right, so let's move on to our observations and try to keep ourselves moving here since we have a hour-long talk here coming up as well. So here are our visuals. I thought I would start off with the B1 camera comparing an image from about a week ago.
Hold on. You're not there. Drop it up there.
Oh, I see. Here we go.
There
we go. All right, here's our B1 camera, and I'm just comparing an image from the 27th of January to the 5th February here. Two clear images that are easy to compare. And really, when you look here, there's not a whole lot of change. Sometimes we see land rising or falling. And I'm doing the snapshot because there's a lot of in-between views with lots of VOG, which make it hard to compare or really keep track of any pixel over a little animation here. So really, you don't see a whole lot of change at all from the east end of the crater. And coming to the KW camera from the 26th compared to the 3rd, with the two clear views I found recently here, the biggest change is visible right in this ponding area right here, which we're seeing actually sagging, as we've seen happen after every episode recently thus far as well. So no major surprise there, but still cool to see that. Let's zoom it in for those of you guys that watching on smaller screens. You can see some areas back here not moving, and then you can see this little zone right in here seemingly changing texture. It's really dropping downwards in 3D there. That's the biggest change over the last week. We look at the nighttime views. Here's a V1 camera for the last week. You're seeing glow, persistent spots of incandescence here and there, but it's intermittent. It's not constant the entire time. Here's a V2 camera, which is further away, and you actually see less. So if you're visiting the park and you're looking through a camera like this that doesn't have very good night vision, you might not see a whole lot. But so hopefully your eyes are doing you better than that. And here's a V3 camera, maybe showing us the best view of the nighttime glow and these spots of incandescence by the north vent here. South vent, north vent, both of them showing these little spots and these occasional illumination from the glow. Harder to see here in this speed animation, but there have been some reports from the USGS of occasional flames as well, including some from last week. We'll let Lou talk about that here in just a couple minutes here. Before I do that, to finish off, here's the F1 camera for the last week, which is great because it sees through the whole VOG. And so overall, you also see not a whole lot of change over the last week, really with the biggest change happening in that central spot of deflation, which at this speed, you don't really see it that well. So those are our time lapses from this past week. We'll just do a quick check-in on the live cams right now before passing it to Lou. Here is a V1, completely VOG'd out. The V2, half VOG'd out there, and the V3 with the clearest, best view of that really thick fume output from the north vent and less so from the south vent right there. So we'll talk more about the monitoring signals in the USGS reports, but I do mention the flames, which I'll pass to Lou to talk about among other observations you've had this past week.
Right on. Yeah, the story is really VOG, right? And we bounce between those three cameras, and at any time of the day, 1 to 2 of them are completely VOG'd out. So it's constantly bouncing between them to see what's going on. And it doesn't help at night. We know the V2 camera at night is difficult. It just doesn't have the low light sensor. It's all the way at the other side of the caldera. It struggles. there have been some moments of glow picking up off that camera. So when we see any type of light on that camera, we know there's something more significant happening, whether it's a big push of gas, we get a big glow off of that, or spatter starting up. Not much this time around because it has been pretty foggy out there. There was a report of some flames. I'm going to show you those in a second. Let me drop up the first shot here. Phil just ran through them pretty quick. That was probably one of the best flaming glows we caught. It's at 2 o'clock in the morning. Is full moon activity going on right there. So you can see the caldera is lit up pretty good. Give you a good idea. There's no spatter that we could see, obviously, unless we were standing up there and zoom in on it, but pretty much just glow. We did catch spatter 2 nights ago, briefly. Last night, let me keep going with all the flame. Here's the one shot of the early morning flame. HVO had talked about the flames that went on at what time was that, Phil? 10:30 or 11:30 at night, I think was in their report. But this was what I picked up on first thing in the morning. I'll go ahead and I'll play that again. I think this was a little bit bigger than what would happen later in the evening. And this happened throughout the early morning. I'm not going to bring up the whole 4 a.m. thing because Dane's not here and it's not fair for him to not be able to give it to me when I bring up 4 a.m. But it kind of started about 4 a.m. and trailed on since after that. Now, last night was tough for observations because of the fog, and looking through the lens of the V1 cam is extremely difficult at night when there's low light and a lot of fog. Phil played the F1 cam. I'm going to play it here again, and let's see if I can grab it here. You can see the vent off there on the side, and it, like Phil says, it cuts through the fog, but it's not enough to really pick up on spatter. And those are the messages that I keep getting asked. Are we seeing any spatter? We can't see it because there's so much fog in that caldera, and it's pointing right at the V1 cam, which is our best really hopes some nights for fog. The USGS-HVO zoomed in on the vents, which help us out, but we're all just waiting like you guys. So that's our observations for the week. We hope things will clear up and get a little better views.
It's interesting how spoiled we are now, right? Because we actually have 3 live cams. We're like, oh god, right. 2 of them aren't showing me anything.
Right.
What's going on? Like before, we didn't have a single one.
That's crazy,
right?
Yeah, it's
so
crazy.
There wasn't even any spatter to ask about because no one got to see it unless you're standing there in front of the thing yourself. So
yeah,
just to shout out the USGS here, we appreciate them.
Absolutely,
just how it is, right? And so 3 cameras is awesome. That means one is getting a good view all the time. That's pretty incredible that they actually got us to this point.
I love when they adjust the cameras. We always, at the end of the episodes, we wait for them to kind of reposition and get set in this time in between. And then 2 days ago, 24, 36 hours ago, they start the first little zoom ins, right? So everybody gets that. Is it time for precursory? Are we, everybody gets that level of anxiety, maybe anticipation kind of steps up a notch. It's been they've made it a totally different experience because we can view it online now. And so, like you said, hats off to those guys for the time and effort to be able to keep that coming for us when it's, obviously, they do it for research and data, but we get to enjoy it.
Yeah, here's our zoomed in view, and we're just trying to get a closer view of what's going on there, right? So yeah, we'll keep an eye on you guys and update you guys on this part of it next week.
Yep. Shall we roll into community corner?
Not else? Quite yet. Let's do that before our talk, yeah. Since it's going to be our back half. So let's switch over to our monitoring, and let's look at a couple of highlights of the monitoring updates that have been put out. So here's Saturday, January 31st, and this is when they actually note that there was intermittent moderate glow from the south vent, less glow from the north vent, but it did emit occasional flames, including a large bright flame at 10:37 p.m. That's that one, the first mention of a large flame by the USGS. I'll skip a bunch of days in between, but all the way to Wednesday, they note that there's intermittent glow. They note that small flames are present many recent nights. Essentially, that's repeated over and over the week, and so we'll just leave it at that, and we showed you what was really up with that. across the video. So today's update puts out the window of February 11th to 16th once again, and notes this lack of glow actually over the last night, although there was a tiny persistent spot of incandescence at the north vent. So they did see vertical views into the south vent yesterday, saw no incandescence. North vent was obscured by the gas plume. However, they have seen pulses of tremor recurring under the summit several times per hour, correlating with periods of increased brightness at the south vent, suggesting that gas pistoning is continuing within that conduit. So that's the lava's in there. It's just too deep to see, too bright to see it in the daytime, and we just wait for it to come up a little further. The other interesting thing to note here is that the SO2 rate was measured on February 2nd, and they measured it at, they're actually reporting probably beyond the error, really, but 5,000-ish tons of sulfur dioxide per day, which is slightly higher than typical range of 1 to 5,000 tons observed during previous pauses. So that's interesting. The gases are coming up more so. So we've wondered in the past if that means that the episode might come a little sooner, since the gas emissions often correlate to the magma input to the volcano. So wait and see once again there. The USGS is also now including the weather forecast. For example, today's southwest winds of 6 to 11 miles an hour, and noting areas around a national park experiencing higher than usual levels of fog due to the ongoing light and variable winds. So that's really it. 42 is sometime around Valentine's Day, with the window really being the 11th to the 16th. But if you're gonna pick one day, why not Valentine's Day? Let's see what she does for us there. Maybe we'll have a heart-shaped fountain, right? Who knows? So that's the text updates. Just to remind you, everything's happening within the national park in Kīlauea, the summit caldera, and most recent stats shown here. We'll not do a stat update today since we are gonna have an extra presentation, but we'll do that next week here. So our current signals for the last week, our laser is not showing much with the range and noise on here, but our tilt's coming up at the summit and steady flat or going down at the East Rift at Pu'o'o. Earthquake counts over the last week, fairly steady, but really you gotta go back further in time. Here is a depth versus time, and really you can tell here that the beginning of the week, those first couple of days, we had these bigger earthquakes continuing, but earthquakes have been actually less and smaller over much of the past week here in this shallow portion. If we look at where the earthquakes are still occurring, we still have the south flank events. It's really the summit that's missing and smaller. So really it's the summit events that have backed off. And so that's a curiosity. We also are going to wait a next chapter from the volcano. Zooming out to the last month of data, more noise in the laser rangefinder. You can't see much there. We do see more of this sawtooth pattern of deflation during episode 40, recovery of the volcano, deflation during 41, recovery. And so we'll expect another pattern like that for episode 42 upcoming. But we've not quite reached the threshold there that's expected for that to occur. And part of that is because we actually dropped so far, we lost quite a lot of ground tilt during 41, about twice as much as we had during 40, right? So you can see it's a longer, a larger fall, a larger output of volume, and therefore a little bit longer recovery as a result of that. And dive into that a little bit more next week as well. For our earthquake counts for the last month, we noted here they are. We had this initial flurry at the summit a couple weeks ago that was then followed by these consistent earthquakes at the summit, and then those are the ones that have backed off here, as we mentioned during our summary, looking a little smaller right there. You can see the deep Pahala zone is still fairly consistent, with its natural variations that occur there. So over 3 months, there is our pattern. You can see here relatively how 40 was smaller than 39 and 41, right? And so usually the longer the drop, the longer the recovery, the shorter the drop, the shorter the recovery. And that's a bit of that. So this is a big one. It's going to take a little bit longer here. If you're curious, the average over the last 10 episodes has been 13 days of pause between vigorous eruptions. Although none of them has actually been 13, that's the average. The most common one has been 16 days over the past. So some statistics there, we can dive into some more later. Over the whole eruption, here is the pattern, and you can see that the threshold has varied, sometimes trending downwards, sometimes staying flat. Currently seems to be trending downwards, and so that's incorporated into the models for where this tilt threshold has to reach for the next episode to have an onset. And that's where they get their calculations of volume erupted, as well as when the next episode might come. So over the whole year, here is the depth of lava stepping upwards with each episode when it's online and flowing underneath the laser. Earthquake counts per week for the last year. You can see we're elevated over the past few weeks, but now we're going to resume back to normal here. 3 weeks of higher, or 2 weeks of really much higher, 1 week of a little bit higher, and you're back down once this current week wraps up here on this graph. Our summit GPS measuring the caldera distance north to south is still showing quite a lot of this, as I keep calling it, an accordion pattern, where it's stretching out slowly over the course of the recharge, and then dropping quickly during the episodes, which last on average 8-10 hours, something like that, right? 6-8 hours. So that's a really fast drop, as opposed to these days-long recovery that you see, and stretching further apart over time as well. So it's like a wiggly tooth. The volcano is just really working those cracks, those hinges. So that's interesting to note about where that weaknesses might be. And as the eruption evolves, which it must do someday, then how that might affect that process as well. And our GPS at the rift zone is offline for the distance measurement. But we saw from the tilt that everything looks okay over there. The USGS is reporting the same thing. For extra comfort, I can bring into the 2-year GPS plots, which at the summit are showing the ground going down and moving. But at Pu'o'o and Middle East Rift, they're showing it actually also going down quite rapidly with no indication of any magma injection, unlike what we saw in mid-2024, which is what that signal looks like, something like that. So none of that, just steady downwards, nothing indicated on the rift zone anytime soon. So those are the monitoring signals. I think, let's see here. Let's show you the one mounts project. We have an INSAR image here that was captured on the 4th for the previous 6 days. And here it is again, a little bit bigger, showing the pass of the satellite over the volcano after episode 41 ended. And so if you look at the pattern in here, there's a little bit of mottled zone within the crater itself. That's the actual surface of lava adjusting, or something along those lines, right? Over the course of time with injections or the sagging or what have you. And in the broader picture, these bigger bands, which seem to be centered around here, right? You see like a purple followed by an orange, followed by green, eventually it gets to blue out there, right? So towards the center, blue to green to red to purple is towards the radar. It's inflation. So this is tracking the filling and the bulging of the ground as the volcano is recharging over the last week or so. Those are the monitoring signals. We'll move on to earthquakes in a little bit more detail here. Recent earthquakes from the USGS plotted by depth here for the last week. Pahala population is ongoing steady. We have a couple other events north part of the island, which are also settling events. We've pointed out Kīlauea, which has a few south flank events noteworthy here. Let's zoom this in a little bit. South flank events here, a few summit events. You noted our other map shows more dots than this because it's got a smaller threshold. But this gives us a bigger picture, showing us all the way to the east tip of the island, where you see there are some other smaller adjustment earthquakes on that flank as well. But also we're seeing here that there is earthquakes on Mauna Loa, and these are all in an intermediate depth range here, and nothing clustering and nothing really, whether it's in space or time. So it doesn't seem like it's anything major changing, but continuing adjustments of the volcano to its recovery, also filling with magma ever since the end of 2022. So that's how they look on that map. Let's show you guys the earthquakes plotted by time. So the most recent one coming in here is that one, 1.8, 20 miles down, 5 miles west of Kīlauea, Kona. Otherwise, the largest earthquake over the last week was a 3.1 Deep Pahala right over here that occurred about a week ago. We're actually now on the 30th here and 20 miles down as well. So nothing really noteworthy to pull out from the earthquakes. We'll just leave it at that for this week here. But we did mention Mauna Loa, so let's look at the Mauna Loa signals. We see a lot of that small non-volcanic variations here day to day on the tilt. Earthquakes, depth versus time, is not really very interesting. There's not that many earthquakes to see any real pattern at that scale. Over the month-long period of time, we see maybe these bigger swings that are also not volcanically related. And earthquake rates per day, you can see had a jump here, which if we look at our depth time plot corresponds to this larger event that was a Mauna Loa flank just about 1 week ago. There, that was that magnitude 3. Let's see if I can find that one up here again. 3.3 there on the 29th. Yeah, just about a week ago here. So there it is, and some shallow earthquakes following as well. But we see that the deep earthquakes we saw last month, that you can see are spread out in time here, but tracking this activation of that deeper root system of the volcano. When we zoom out in time to like a 1 year period, they look like they're more clustered as a set right there. Right? There's earthquakes per week over the last year. You can see it got a little bit higher beginning in January, following a peak in November. But overall, it's got this variation. See up and down and up and down. And so one of the things we heard from USGS was you're looking for the steadily increasing climb of counts, and we're not seeing that. We're just seeing this adjustment here, adjustment there, adjustment here, adjustment there pattern from the volcano right now. So all that's as expected. The big picture really is this, that over the last 5 years, we're down here. So we've had a slight climb right here. This is our change we're talking about, but it's nothing compared to the scale we saw before 2022. So that said, here is a most recent USGS update that notes seismic activity increased slightly over the past month, with tight clustering of events under Mokuaweʻoweʻo and upper southwest rift zone early in the month. That was a continuation of elevated earthquake production from the end of the previous month. A total of 123 events were detected under the summit region in January, while the prior month had 94. GPS shows variable rates of inflation at the summit over the past 6 months. This is associated with refilling of the summit reservoir system following the 2020 eruption, as well as a recent refilling of a magma chamber under the southern caldera region. Gas is normal, temperatures are normal, everything else is as expected. So that's the Mauna Loa update. And with that, we have reached time for our community corner, Lou.
All right. I've been, Volcano Watch just came out, so you can take a look at that while we go through some things here at Community Corner. But first, I had a request that somebody was asking about the spatter and if I had a clip of it, and I do. So I'm going to drop it up here on the screen. Happened on the 4th. That's yesterday, 2:54 a.m. That is the visual of the spatter happening right there, where the magma is a little bit closer to the surface than what we can see right now. And we've had some bog kind of blocking that out. So a little late addition to our observations, but it still counts, Phil.
Great job getting that in there.
All right, we got it. All right, let's roll into the community corner here. Let me drop this and put this in here and see what's going around here. I don't have permission for that, apparently. All right, let's go. As we know, there's still renovations going on in the park tonight and every day for the last year. We went up there this weekend to look around. We go up there quite a bit, but it's good to see some progress going on. Highway 11 still has utility pole replacement going on. The Tree Molds Road is intermittent closures happening. They're asking don't hold the tephra. Phil talks about that all the time, about the Pele's hair that's in it. You pick it up, you're ooh and on, taking your pictures. It's going to get in your fingers. It's not fun to get out. And watch out for the wasps. They never go away up there. Lava viewing all over the park. And even one of my favorite spots is, just like we got closed out of episode 41, you can always head up top and enjoy the view looking down up on Mauna Loa. Here's a shot we took when we were up there on Sunday. This is looking a Kīlauea Iki overlook, straight shot down to the vents. Great shot. As a matter of fact, that's right there in the parking lot. If you didn't even want to get out of your car because it was cold, you could take a look at the episode going on. This is where I was talking about earlier, where Tephra was getting blown out of the trees onto the rental cars. There are your lava viewing areas. They're everywhere. They'll pretty much only be dictated right now by VOG. If the park closes down an area, that we've seen them close down Waikahuna, Keanakekoi, Kilauea Overlook, we've seen them close those areas down due to safety. So my best recommendation is pull into the Welcome Center if you're curious. It's hard when the fountain is going off to not be so anxious to get out there and get your look, but it doesn't hurt. If you've never been to the park, drop in there. And even if you've been to the park, just drop in and ask a question. You know, what's working, what's safe, and where to go. Here's the progress that's going on down at the old visitor center that they have completely taken down and rebuilt. This is what it looked like a little while ago, and this is what it looks like right now. They've got the roof going on there. Progress is continuing, so good job on the park, just pounding away up there. There's another shot of it right there. It's going to be a really nice outdoor pavilion. They didn't have this up there before. This is replacing the bathrooms, the third only flushable toilets that you can really access. So they're replacing that with this outdoor pavilion, but have no fear. They have new bathrooms that are flushable on the other side that are going up right there. So roofing on the restrooms relocated to the east end of the building is complete. And the leach field, important part of it right there, and absorption beds are close to being finished. Environmental assessment protocol is being followed. There's another shot of it right there. So hopefully in the next year, we'll have this all reopened. We'll get our parking back, and the visitor center will be back in action, and we'll get back into our after dark in the parks up there. Here's a shot of the HVO building that is almost done. I found out last week that everything here is tentative when it comes to completion dates due to weather and eruptions. But it looks like somewhere between the springtime. I'm not going to put a month on it. I'm just going to say the springtime right there. They'll have their new office, and they'll be out of the Ironworks building downtown and call this their new home. Probably one of the nicest buildings on this island. So I look forward to them getting in there and keeping their work going for us.
It's got an elevator, I heard, yeah?
Heck yeah. Think I'm walking up the stairs when I go in there? Taking the elevator. Come on, Philip.
So yeah, it's first one in national parks that I am aware of ever having been there. Not counting those steel cable trolleys they used to sling across the right. A little bit more high tech now.
Do we have it verified that it's not one of those? Why break with tradition?
Let's ask the next chance we have. Yeah.
All right. I'll definitely put that on the top of my list. All right. Parking up there is chaos. There are people from every corner of the planet. Seriously, every corner of the planet in that park at all times of the week. Not everybody understands our driving style here. So if you're from here, if you are a normal common sense driver, pay attention and just work your best way through it, because parking is brutal. People are parking everywhere where they're not supposed to be. I recommend park where you should be. Recognize that you're in a safe area, because the park is issuing citations and they will tow you. They don't want you parking where there's cones set up, and they have barricades along the road now. They don't want you parking on the grass where you may hit a nene or get stuck. Last week, there were 3 vehicles that I saw being towed out because they pulled over too far to the side of the road. So pay attention. Here's that road I was talking about, Mauna Loa Road. Great viewing, and you don't even have to park inside that area of the park. You can go up top. These fountains are so massive that you can get a great view from up top. and really avoid the tephra, the VOG, and the parking. I recommend this trip up here. Here is something that should be good today. I haven't got a late afternoon notification. I was waiting for it for this community corner, but the restroom over at the lava tube there was closed. I don't know why. I just heard it was closed, but it should be open today, hopefully. Stay tuned for that one. Stay hydrated as well up at the park. Sun and wind exposure are a real thing. It's cold right now, but then it gets sunny and you get hot. Wear a wind-brimmed hat for some sun protection. Drink plenty of water. You guys should know all of this. These are common sense things when you are outdoors. I see a lot of people up there in open-toed shoes. Good luck. That's all I got to say on that one. There it is. Stay hydrated. The park says safety is your responsibility. There are not water bottle filling stations yet, so make sure you bring it. There is water available for sale, but good luck if you're there after hours. Bring it. And for those that have been sending me messages, thank you very much. Here you go. Uh-oh. Let's see if I get it. Oh, it didn't give it to me. You're going to have to wait. Uh-oh. Phil, we're going to have to come back to that one. Sorry, guys. Didn't work. That's your video. Let's see if I lost everything now. There we go. Stewardship at the summit for rainforest restoration is going on. Volunteer to help remove invasive non-native plant species that prevent native plants from growing in Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. February 7th, meet at 8:45 up at the park. They'll provide some shovels and gear for you up there, but dress appropriately. We are going to get hit with rain. Philip just talked about this weather advisory that's coming up on us. We're expecting a soaker. I would also maybe even check in with the Welcome Center to make sure it's even still going on that morning, just in case.
That might be before the rain comes, possibly, yeah?
Right.
Yeah, keep an eye on that.
Yep. Check the park website. They may put an announcement up there. Sign up for their email. They may put that out as well as an announcement. Yeah. Last time I was up at Waikahuna, which was a couple days back, 4 or 5 days ago, I noticed a sign outside as you walk out to the viewing area. And that is a sign they have out there of ranger guided programs. So if you pass the Welcome Center, know that look for a sign up there if you're interested. And if they're having something, double back or ask one of the rangers. I saw 2 rangers while I was up there. There's rangers everywhere. Ask questions. The Hawaii Science and Tech Museum has an event going on. It's the Keiki STEM Workshop Blender. That's going on at 10 o'clock on February 7th. This will be going rain or shine, guarantee you there. There's an email address right there, emmy@hawaiisciencemuseum.org to get registered. There is a small fee. It's $1 for children and $2 for adults, grades 1 through 6. This should be a really good program put on by these guys. And I got to double up on that one and join our email list to get your alert. Dane and I sent your alert out for episode 41 on the highway when Philip was talking about us getting stuck on the other side of the island during this episode. We were over there sending out this email. And if you'd like to get notified, go ahead and sign up at hvari.org/subscribe. Also to be part of our newsletter email list is also there. And that brings us into here. And I'd like to say thanks again to everyone for tuning in. Our organization truly relies on support from viewers like you. Every like, subscription, and share helps us keep the stream going and makes it more visible to others who might benefit from it. We also like to extend our gratitude to the County of Hawaii for supporting us, both through the VIVI grant and soon the Kīlauea Recovery Grant. Their support helps us fund a broader work in digital resilience and youth development. And big mahalo out to Mark. I saw Super Chat come in here. Where is it at here, Mark? Mark Hardman threw out $50 somewhere in there. There we go. Thank you, Mark. And Norm also threw out $20. Thank you. And I see Raymond over on our donation platform also threw out $10. Thank you guys very much for your support. Then I think that covers our donations. All right, Phil, do you want one question before we go to our video? I got one question.
Sure, we can do a question.
All right. So the question was brought up that someone is unsure about seismic activity as it refers to waxing and waning at Kīlauea.
I'm sure about the activity as it refers to, so yeah, I mean, there have been, oh yeah, so someone, it's not uncommon for it to wax and wane, absolutely, right? But the interesting thing is that during this most recent waxing, the USGS put out information statements suggesting that the eruption might actually change in character because of that, right? So that's really the interesting part there. So why we give it a little bit more attention is because of that. But yeah, it is normal. So, you know, what we saw the last time is despite all those earthquakes, the fountaining through the existing vents was still the easiest outlet. And so that's what we expect without the earthquakes as well. So really, the earthquakes are an interesting twist into things here, but it hasn't actually led to anything different that much yet. Yeah.
Perfect. There's some other questions that have been coming in that you guys have asked that's going to be answered in this presentation from Lis Gallant from the University of Hawaiʻi at Hilo. One of them is what is actually a lava bomb. She talks about that and what the actual size. I don't know, Phil, you may like this. What the actual legal size to qualify is for a lava bomb was interesting, and as well as,
64 millimeters.
Oh, we gotta wait. You're gonna have to watch.
Wait,
Phil.
huh? That was on the thing I should put up earlier.
And then the other thing is how they are measuring the height of a fountain, because at the end of every episode, everybody always says, well, it was this. So not only is Lis Gallant there talking about it, but there's also David Phillips there as well from USGS-HVO. So stay tuned. Here we go.
Well, so yeah, before that, Lou, let's you mentioned Volcano Watch is out. We can touch on that real quick here.
Grab it.
So let me get my screen back up.
There you go.
So here is Volcano Watch, just recently released, hot off the press. New citizen science tool. Is Tephra falling is the name of the tool. Right? So the long and short of this, this is not yet posted, but it will be shortly across all of our platforms, is that the Alaska Volcano Observatory has a tool called Is Ash Falling? Because they constantly have ash falls in Alaska. And they basically are crowdsourcing the data because you can't go out and measure everywhere the ash is falling. And it's much easier to have everyone report to you whether ash is falling or not, wherever they are. And that's what they can use to then draw their maps of where things are falling, such as the one we saw put out last week. And where is it? Here it is, right there, right? So these kind of maps, how do they draw the boundary between the orange and the yellow and know that it goes right there, or the red and the orange and know that it goes right there, right? You have to have a data point, one over here and one over here to make the distinction. So the more data people can submit, the easier this becomes. Right? So yeah, there is that clue for the class size again for those who are looking. But back to the Volcano Watch, the tool, I won't read through all of this, right? But the tool looks like this. Is Tephra falling? You can report the time. It loads to wherever you happen to, load it right then and there. You can click on a map for a location. Let's say you were, I don't know, over here. It loads the lat longe in there, or you can type in an address otherwise. And you can say Tephra is here. Right. Otherwise, you can optionally include some information if you like, but none of that is shared. Of course, everything is protected. And really, they're interested in like the size, average size, and largest size and location. Is it continuous or discontinuous? And they are interested not only in yes answers, but no answers as well, because that helps you draw the boundary between where it did fall and where it didn't fall as well. Right. So that's basically the short version of it. But yes, we'll leave it at that and look for the information further on our feeds. And so that said, let's go to our Volcano Awareness presentation, Lou.
All right, I'm gonna get it up here. There we go.
All right, enjoy Dr. Lis Gallant.
Aloha, everyone.
Aloha.
Good evening. Lots of familiar faces in the crowd and other folks. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Lis Gallant, who is now a professor at the University of Hawaiʻi at Hilo. And
Where did you go to college, David?
I myself am a graduate of University of Hawaiʻi Hilo, and I was a geology major there. And the ties between UH Hilo and Hawaiian Volcano Observatory have never been stronger. And so Lis was a National Science Foundation postdoc researcher working at HVO for a number of years, and that was, of course, where I first met Lis. And doing amazing things. And every time I turned around, she had new ideas and new toys or scientific instruments like, radars, ground-based radars, not just the satellite ones that we normally use. And she's always coming up with new ideas and ground-penetrating, all of these amazing things. So it's wonderful to have her giving a Volcano Awareness Month presentation. This is the last VAM presentation of 2026. It's been an epic Volcano Awareness Month. Katie Mulliken, maybe a quick round of applause for Katie, if anyone knows Katie. She made all of this happen. So without further ado, the star of the show, Professor Lis Gallant.
All right, well, I have my, I have my, all right. My slide person has wandered off for a second. So David, can you man my, my laptop for a second? Just hit the next. There we go. So aloha, everyone. My name is Aloha. So I asked before, but we had some new folks join. How many of you live here on island? Perfect. So there are a lot of really great questions that I've gotten from some of my neighbors. How many of you know Arlene? Yeah, Arlene is my neighbor. And so the idea for doing something like this actually came because Arlene would ask me a lot of questions, and she goes and walks around the volcano like every morning. If you've ever met a person like my height with, I don't know, more, who looks like she is my age in her, personality, that's Arlene. And so Arlene asked me a lot of questions, and one of the things I noticed is that all of my neighbors are asking me really high-level questions, but then occasionally there would be like a weird sort of gap where like, oh, you guys are self-trained volcanologists on this specific volcano and Hawaiian volcanoes. And so when I talk to people, there are assumptions I make based on the questions that I'll get. And I'm like, oh, there are, we would call them in a non-shameful way, like a knowledge gap. And so because of talking with my neighbors, I figured this would be a nice kind of thing to maybe fill in some of the more broad basic stuff so that when we have these super high level questions that all my neighbors have, right, we're sharing a common vernacular. And so some of you might know some of these things and some of you might not, but we are gonna do our best, and if it seems like everybody knows stuff, you guys can just start asking me questions. That's fine too. Can I have my slide, please? So what are we gonna do today? Well, I'm gonna tell you a little bit about myself. Why am I qualified to talk at you about volcanoes? Then we're gonna talk a little bit about how magma gets, right? How is magma created? We are constantly dealing with the end product of magma, which is our lavas or our tephras, but it turns out there's a lot that needs to happen for an eruption to start, and understanding that helps us understand where volcanoes can occur, why they occur, and the conditions we need to get them. We're also going to talk about different kinds of lavas. Did you know that there's not just on Pahoehoe, there's a whole suite of different lavas. It's dependent on the chemistry, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but not too much of the chemistry. If you're like my students, they took my class so that they would not have to take a chemistry class. So, and then we're going to talk a little bit about eruption styles. As we have probably learned, you can have a variety of different eruption styles at the same volcano. And a lot of people will be like, well, why do you have things falling on your roof? I thought Hawaii erupted with lava flows. Well, yes, it erupts with lava flows, but other sorts of things as well. And so filling in those gaps. And finally, tephra. I wasn't originally going to talk about that, but then it fell on everybody's roof. And so I figured we cover a little bit about some of the terminology and how we get different kinds of tephra. Topically relevant. We like to stay current in our classes. All right, next slide, please. And so thank you for the introduction, David. I appreciate that. One of the things that I like to talk about with my students is my nonlinear path into geology. I feel like, a lot of people will talk to scientists right? As a person that worked with the Volcano Observatory, like, oh, they assume that we're just scientists and not other things, that you had it really put together. I did not have anything put together at the beginning. And so I actually have a pretty non-linear path through to become a volcanologist who's able to stand here and talk to you today. I didn't know what I wanted to do for college, and so I went to community college. I moved around a lot, but I'll say I'm from the New York area. That's why if I sound aggressive when I'm talking to you, that's just how we sound. If I don't like you, I just won't talk to you. Like that's just the New York way. That's just the New York way. And so I went to community college, and then I actually have an art degree. I have a graphic design communications art degree. And for those of you, maybe with grandkids, I'm gonna assume, maybe those of you with grandkids, I use that art degree every day in my geology career. Like learning how to communicate with people. Art is not just, you know, here I painted this thing for you. It's how do you communicate these ideas? And so it turns out that art degree is super helpful. I did a semester in Aotearoa, New Zealand, which was great. I majored in playing rugby for the most part. And then I went and I took a Te Reo Māori class. And so that actually helped me learn a little bit of Aloha Hawaiʻi. So that was super, super excellent. And when I was playing rugby, I met a gal, her name is Katie, and not Katie Mulliken though, different Katie. There are a lot of Katies in volcanology, it turns out. I'm like, what do you do? She's like, I'm a volcanologist. That sounds like a fake job. Are you looking for, you know, a $2.5 million, 8-bedroom, like 40-bath house on the TV? Because those are the people that have jobs like that. And it turns out that was not the only person I met that was a volcanologist. I went back to the States and I was working, and I didn't like my job, so I went back to school to become an elementary school teacher. And on day one of my class at Buffalo State College, a woman's like, I'm a volcanologist and I need some students to help me do research. If anybody's interested, please come talk to me. Absolutely was interested, and so that's how I kind of transitioned away from art, not away from education, but away from like K through 12 education and into geology. And so through that experience, I got to work in El Salvador when I was an undergrad, and then I moved to nowhere because I applied for grad schools and I didn't get in the first time. I had a lot of research, I had really good grades, but I didn't come from a big fancy school, and so there weren't a lot of opportunities. You know, no one's rolling the door open for Buffalo State College students at the time. And then I threw my application into the abyss for the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory. And so if you don't like the product that is provided for you today, you can blame Frank Truesdell, because he's the one that accepted my application. And so if you don't like it, blame Frank. And so after I got my chops cut here at HVO as an intern in 2012, more of the doors opened for me. And so I went to the University of South Florida, known for its volcanoes, and I got a master's and a PhD there. Well, so it turns out when you don't live on a volcano, you get to travel to volcanoes. And when you live in Florida and don't like the heat, traveling outside of Florida, very attractive. And so then I graduated, and on March 1st of 2020, I moved to England. The timing was not ideal, it turns out in retrospect, and I was doing hazards work at the University of Cambridge, and it turns out that I am not built for that kind of environment. I'm not fancy enough, which is probably shocking to you sitting here, you know, knowing me for about 15 minutes. And I had also applied for the role that I met David at, and so that's why I'm here talking to you now. And so when we talk about volcanoes, we're really focused here on Hawaiian volcanoes, but a lot of my experiences were formed outside of Hawaii. And so that really, I think, helps me have kind of a broad perspective on things while still maintaining, right, the ties with the Aina and really focusing on why our volcanoes are special. Within that, you know, these aren't the only volcanoes, but I think they're the best ones. All right, next slide, please. Thanks. And so I think that's all fine, right? I have the papers and the credentials to talk at you guys about this. But I think most importantly is, and if you hit next, it should start to play the video. If you live here, I'm your neighbor. This is what my house was doing right during the eruptions. I think there should be some sound though. Yeah, just turn it all the way up. Yeah. And so, right, those are basketball-sized pieces of tephra just bouncing off my roof. And if you listen to this on a phone, it's even scarier sounding, and it kind of felt that way. And so I'm not here talking at you folks, right? I mean, I am because I'm standing and most of you are sitting, but we're neighbors, right? We're going through this stuff together. We're cleaning off our roofs together. We are picking up our Tyvek suits from the Red Cross folks at the Cooper Center together. And so your experience is my experience. And so if you have any questions, you know, I have some of the same lived experience, so happy to chat. All right. Most of you know what this sounds like because you were living in it too. So next slide, please. And so we've already covered too much of it already. Let's talk about how magma is born. Right? Next slide, please. And so it turns out that under normal conditions in our crust, right, the Earth has some different layers to it. There's a core, there's a mantle, there's a crust. Nowhere in the crust should magma actually exist in a molten form, right? How many of you are divers? Do you go, or have ever been in the ocean and tried to go down further and it felt like the ocean was trying to enter your brain through your ears, right? As you go deeper, you have more intense pressures. And it's the same thing in the Earth. And so once we get a kilometer or mile, whatever you want below the crust, our pressures and our temperatures are high. The temperatures are high, that's good for melting, but it turns out if you have enough pressure around something, it's not gonna want to exist in its liquid form. And so nowhere in the crust should magma actually exist in a molten form. All right, next slide, please. And so this technically means that volcanoes shouldn't exist. Do you think this is true? No, we could go outside and look at the trappings of the fact that they very much exist. So can you hit next, please? Thank you. And so they obviously exist, and so we need to change what normal looks like in our crust. We can do that in a variety of ways. And so, question for you folks, and I like to use a lot of cooking analogies when I'm teaching. How do you change the melting temperature of something? Or how do you get something to melt? Does anybody want? This is interactive. Come on, guys, you like my students. So you said you add salt? Yeah, you can add something chemical as a catalyst to the reaction to change it. That's great. So adding a different catalyst, that's one way to do it. I'm going to put the easy one out there. You can add heat, right? You can melt things with heat. I hope none of you, I think Yvonne, was your umbrella wasn't melted, it was just punctured, right? It was just punctured. Yeah, I've melted a couple of pairs of boots doing field work though, so you can add heat to melt things. There's one other way. So, pressure. Yeah, you can remove the pressure. All right, great. So can you hit the next slide, please? Thank you. And so, yeah, we can generate our magma, or we can, generate melt through the removal of pressure. Has anybody ever been to Iceland? Excellent. And so they have volcanoes that look a lot like ours, but the way that they get their eruptions is a little bit different because we have the boundary of two tectonic plates at Iceland kind of pulling apart. And so that's a removal of pressure. This is us in the middle. Does anybody know what Hawaii sits on? What you got? The Ring of Fire. The Ring of, so we sit in the Ring of Fire. We're actually right in the middle of it. On a hot spot? A hot spot, there we go, excellent. So yeah, it's on a hot spot, so aptly named, right? And finally, we can also add water, so that's like your salt example. And those are the different ways that we can get melt. So next slide, please. And so that's great, we can get melt, but does that explain how it gets from wherever it's forming down in the abyss up to the surface? Well, we have a lot of high pressure, and so if it's just there existing, we need something else. We need to think about some other kinds of forms. How many of you were alive in the 70s? I expect more than one hand to get raised, right? So next slide, please. Right? Some of you might have had these. And so buoyancy, right? As we are melting or rock that's in the mantle or in the crust, we are making something that's now less dense than the rocks that are surrounding it. And so that's when we'll get our magmas starting to rise. And so when we're thinking about the Ring of Fire, for example, there's a reason, we're weird and we're in the middle. I like it that way, but there's a reason why we have concentrations of volcanoes around the outsides, and it's because melt is being preferentially generated in those areas. You can get hot spots. Has anybody ever heard of Yellowstone? Yep. If I had $1 for every time people was like, when's Yellowstone going to erupt? I would be volunteering for free more often. But yeah, buoyancy is the answer. So unless you have a hot spot, and there actually, there are some hot spots. They're not rare, they're not unique, but they're not the most common way of getting melt. But you have to have some really particular conditions in order to get volcanoes to pop up anywhere, really. And so let's keep going. Let's keep going. Perfect. And so, right, we've already talked about how we get melts. We talked about how the melt kind of ascends upward, but are all volcanoes the same? How many of you have ever been to the Pacific Northwest? Right? Or how many of you remember Mount St. Helens? I can ask that now in this room. I can't with my students. Half of them, how many of you remember 10 years ago? I was 7. And so next slide, please. So yeah, let's talk about the different sorts of, magma flavors. Well, we have different kinds of plates, right? Obviously, the rocks that we are standing on are a little bit odd because they're, pumping directly out of the mantle. But if you go to the continent, do the rocks look the same? In certain places, maybe. Maybe you've never looked at the rocks on the continent. But we have two different kinds of crustal material. We have rocks that are made of more felsic stuff. So anybody ever seen a granite countertop? One of my pet peeves one of my scientific pet peeves, most of those countertops aren't actually granite. They just call them granite countertops. But the lighter colored rocks that we have, that's mostly of what the continental crust is made out of. Most of what the oceanic crust is made out of is the stuff that we're standing on here. Does anybody know the rock type that we have? Basalt. Perfect. And so we have those two different kinds of rock types. And so depending on, next slide, please. And so depending on the food analogies, I actually toned it down for this. But I knew I'd be dealing with an older crowd, so you guys have that Lindt kind of money, not Hershey's money. But yeah, so if we are melting directly through an oceanic plate or pumping magma directly, from the mantle, we tend to get more kind of basaltic, or mafic is a word I'll use, mafic styles of magma. And so I think about that as more of like a dark chocolate. If we are melting through our continental crust, well, there's more, sugar will be we'll use sugar as an analogy. There's more sugar in our continental crust, and so you'll have more white chocolate styles of magmas there. All right, next slide, please. And so that's not the only way, though, right? Because sometimes, we all get to our path a little bit differently. I definitely think my timing of being a student forever, I definitely would be more of a white chocolate kind of timeline because it took me forever to get there. But how long our magmas take to get from where they were started to where they were going also impacts what kind of lavas we get at the surface. And so if we have something that takes a really long time, we'll start to crystallize minerals. Anybody know what the minerals that we have in our lavas here are called? Any names? Olivine, right? Any children of August? Olivine is your birthstone. Excellent. I have garnet. A January birthday and garnet, two very disappointing things. Silicon, yeah. Yeah, and so that's one of the most common things we have in all of our rocks. And so silica is great. And so silica is actually one of the last things that'll crystallize. And so we'll start to crystallize our olivines first, and over time we'll remove all the stuff that we can make olivine with. And if our magmas are still, primed and ready to keep crystallizing, we'll then start to crystallize other minerals until we only have the silica left over. And depending on how long that takes and how fast things are moving, that can also change the flavor of magma you get. Next slide, please. And so one of the classic diagrams we have for our intro level students is this thing, and I'm not, this is not going to be on the test. And so, olivine was the first thing that crystallized, and our pyroxene is one of our brown minerals that you might see, a little bit more common if you're looking at the rocks from Hualalai. But we actually had a lot of these erupting out of the 2024 Nepal eruption, and so we get pyroxenes out of our volcanoes all the time. There are a couple of different, so as you are crystallizing out your olivines and your pyroxenes, you're gonna get a little bit more, we would call it evolved magmas. And does anybody remember 2018? I mean, I know that everybody in this room, except for one person over there, probably remembers it, but we had one kind of weird vent over there, Fissure 17, that was actually erupting andesites. That was erupting andesites, or basaltic andesite, because it was sitting out there evolving a little bit, and then it got, encouraged to erupt just one last time. We tend not to really have so much of this on our island. This is super, super evolved. This is more like what you might see out of those big Yellowstone eruptions. And so when we're thinking about, next slide, please. And so when we're thinking about this, right, the chemistry is going to influence how the volcano erupts and the shape of the volcano. Right, because for those of you that went to the Pacific Northwest or told me you've seen Mount St. Helens, what kind of shape is that? You can just show me with your hands, right? Yeah, just show me a triangle. Show me a triangle. Does that look like our volcanoes here? No, ours are a lot smoother. Next slide, please. And so, yeah, when we're thinking about the nature of these eruptions, if we have more silica, more silicic lavas, and think about it as your white chocolate, so more sugar in our magmas, those are going to give us generally more explosive eruptions. Not always, but generally. Next slide, please. One more. And if we have our kind of dark chocolate or our mafic lavas, we're going to have more effusive eruptions. And so when I say effusive, I mean like lava flowy type things. It didn't feel like we had an effusive eruption on Saturday, but you know, we'll talk about that in a second. And next slide, please. And so eruption styles, right? We are going to talk about how we get different types of eruptions and what controls them. All right. Oh, doing excellent for time. Normally I have like the slides with my clock, so we're winging it here. Next slide, please. And so when we're thinking about, whenever I ask any of the keiki or kids, for those of you who are not like locals or don't know any Aloha Hawaii, whenever I ask kids to draw a volcano, everybody assumes that oh, kids are going to draw these kinds of shapes, this composite volcano. But actually, a lot of our kids on island will draw these shield volcanoes because that's what we have available to us here. That's what the hills look like to us. And so one of the things I think is really important to not to remember, but to understand, I guess, is that you can get a variety of different eruption styles from the same volcano. Because we've had just lava flows from Kīlauea, right? We've had those fissure eruptions out on the flanks, lava flows, and then we had whatever Saturday was, those massive fountains with a lot of gas. Not even just that, we've had even more explosive eruptions than that. And so when we're thinking about the way that we get our volcanic shapes, it is a function of our chemistry. Our more explosive styles might give us, a more steeper sided volcano because when they're not exploding and they're giving us lava flows, those lava flows tend to be thicker and they don't travel as far. So you'll tend to get steeper sided volcanoes if you have more of that like white chocolate style of magma. Not always, but we're in 101 level. So if you want more information, you have to come enroll in my classes. All right, next slide, please. And so, right, what controls an eruption style? Well, it's a variety of things. And so whenever I imagine science happening in my brain, it's kind of like a Dr. Seuss Rube Goldberg machine when I'm thinking about what's controlling the eruption. Like each of these things has a lever, and so you can move these levers either in concert with one another, you just put one of them up, and that'll change the style of the eruption. And so what we're looking at here, right, this should be familiar to us. So we can get lava flows with our lavas, obviously. So this is that dark chocolate or the mafic. But we can also get silicic lava flows, so more of that white chocolate. We just need to have a very small amount of gas in order to do that. But if we have lavas that are moving, or magmas that's moving really quickly as it's erupting, we might get something that is looking a lot more like what we have going on 41 times and counting. But if we have that more kind of white chocolate style, what we had here would look very, very small and pedestrian in comparison to something called a Plinian eruption. And I'll show you some videos of these different kinds of eruption. And so the important part here, I think, to remember is that it's not just one thing that controls our eruptions. It's a lot of stuff, but all of that is definitely governed by which of the magmas we have, right? White chocolate, I guess a milk chocolate. There's a cookies and cream in there too. And so that's all kind of working in concert to dictate overall what our eruptive styles are. I like using Yellowstone because everyone's like, it's overdue. They'll just tell me it's overdue. Oh, way overdue. Actually, the last eruption in Yellowstone was only like 77,000 years ago or something like that. And it was a basaltic lava flow. And so when we're thinking about the end members of these kinds of eruptions, it's important to know that they can all have their own unique range of styles and eruptive types. And it is all dictated by the chemistry of what is erupting, but also the tectonic setting and where it's erupting. They actually pulled a rhyolite, which is the white chocolate kind of stuff, out of a borehole near PGV. It's not very common, but we can have those weird end member things happening here too. And so nobody's special, but everybody's unique in the volcano world. Next slide, please. And so yeah, these are all related to the magma chemistry. But if you move each of these levers a little bit differently, that will give you your 1,600-foot fountain versus your kind of slow churning 2008 through 2018 lava lake. It all depends on which of these levers is driving the train, so to speak. Slide, please. Thanks. And so we have eruption styles. One of the things that we have in volcanology, something called the eruptive, or the VEI, the Volcanic Explosivity Index. And I think it kind of does us dirty here in Hawaii because we're at a 0. But how many people in Hilo had ash on their house? And that felt very explosive to me. And so when we're talking to you about these scales or the way that we classify stuff, It's not necessarily going to work perfectly for every single volcano, but geologists love to classify things, and so we're doing our best here. And so when we're thinking about an increase in explosivity, you see the word Hawaiian and you're thinking Hawaiian volcanoes, but there's actually a specific style of eruption, a Hawaiian style of eruption, and those are technically the least explosive. Again, it doesn't feel like it, but hear me out. I'll show you some videos to convince you. And it gets increasingly more kind of ornery or violent as we go up to those Plinian eruptions. How many of you folks are history buffs? Right, so Vesuvius, Pompeii. I feel like that's what got a lot of people into volcanoes when they learned about Pompeii the first time. And so most of these are actually named, so Palaean is named after Mount Pelée in Martinique. Surtsean is named after Surtsey in Iceland. Volcanian is named after Volcano in Italy. Stromboli is Strombolian, and Hawaiian is, Hawaii, the landscape that we're sitting on right now. Plinian is the only one that has like a guy's name. And so in the Pompeii times, son and father, because at that time they were naming everybody the same thing. So Pliny the Elder was the father. He ended up perishing in the eruption, but his son was documenting it. And so he drew this big giant column, and so they named Plinian columns after that guy. And so those tend to be the most violent. There are even bigger styles of eruptions. You can call them an ultra-Plinian, but at that point, you're not really, those are fine hairs to be splitting. It's a bad day if you're in a Plinian eruption. Next slide, please. And so we're not going to focus on all of them because we don't have time. We're just going to focus on these three. I'm going to show you Plinian first. I'll show you a Volcanian, and then we'll talk a little bit more about Hawaiian because I think it is more relevant to what we're interested in here. Next slide, please. Can you just hit next so it'll start playing the video? Perfect. And so this is the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens. This one does not have any music or sound. It doesn't have any sound or music. And so what we're looking at here is the big ash cloud billowing up. And in these, you can get such violence, such particle interaction that you can often have lightning in these big plumes. One thing that I want you to, I know it's shaky cam. They didn't have a gimbal back then. They weren't doing it for Instagram, so they're less worried about getting it gram ready. One of the things I want you to think about too is how fine that ash was. Did anybody experience Mount St. Helens? So those of you that did, what did the material feel like? Dust, right? It's super, super fine grain. And so one of the kind of relationships that I think is important to understand is more violent, more explosive your eruptions, the smaller your grain sizes are. All right, next slide, please. So we're going to take a look at a Volcanian eruption. You got to hit next one more time so it'll start to play the video. And it's in slow-mo. And so that is a Volcanian style of eruption. And it's hard to tell, but you can see big giant rocks getting flung out the top. Yeah, again, right, Saturday felt super wild, but I'm very thankful that my house is over here and not, 4 miles away from this. And so these are more like throat clearing kinds of eruptions. And again, we had that fine ash, but we also had some of those larger clasts, and so that relationship of more violent, finer grain particles is definitely an important thing to remember. Yeah, what you got?
Does an eruption like this also create a lava flow?
Not usually. So one of the reasons we get eruptions like this is because the magma, remember talking about the gas versus the stickiness? The magma is too sticky to kind of flow, and so it breaks apart. We have a fancy nerd word for that called fragmentation. And so if you have a fluid that you can pass bubbles through pretty easily, those bubbles might just collect in one bubble, or they'll just kind of move through the fluid, no problem. But if you have something that's a little bit too sticky, it's going to take the fluid that's really sticky with it and break it apart as it's trying to expand.
So it solidifies as it's coming out.
Yeah. And so, that ash is not, pleasantly cold. It's unpleasantly hot probably, but it's not going to melt your, property, or, you're not going to set anything on fire in the same way that you might if you're touching a lava flow. And then finally, Hawaiian style. Does that answer your question though, before we move on? Excellent. And so this is ours, right? Hawaiian style eruptions are non-explosive, although we can still get these big fire fountains. Again, compared to that Plinian column, compared to that Volcanian, it's starting to feel hopefully a little bit less explosive, because for those of you that had tephra or any material land on your house, what's the biggest size that you had at your home? you must be my neighbor, because I also had I had basketball-sized pieces landing on my house. And so if that were to happen in some of these other eruptions, that would have been totally torn apart because it would have been so much more violent. And another thing to think about is we've had really fine-grained style eruptions. Does anybody know where Kīlauea is? Right? A lot of you might walk past it when you're trying to get the good view at the overlook. Those eruptions were pretty explosive and a lot more violent than the ones that we're used to. And so Don Swanson, and he will preach the gospel, deservedly so, of the fact that we need to remember that Kīlauea can produce explosive eruptions as well. That was actually one of the big concerns after 2018, right? Last big lava flow, Kīlauea, or Kīlauea, followed by a couple hundred years of Kīlauea, big lava flow in 2018, water lake, like what would be next in store? And it turns out about 1,000 summit eruptions, 41 fountains, a Mauna Loa eruption, but not an explosive couple hundred years. And so as a person that lives up here, pretty thankful for that. All right, next slide, please. Now we're just gonna look at a couple of videos of Hawaiian style eruptions. I want you to pay attention to the height of the fountains. So these are from Mauna Loa in 2022. This is about, I'd say, I don't know, 100 feet high. My scale is now broken like with 1,600-foot fountains, like 100 feet. Ugh. And so can you hit one more, please, so we can see it playing? And so what we're seeing, these big blobs, right? These giant blobs of lava. And we can see that they're feeding this lava flow as well. And with our more explosive eruptions, we're not going to have like the ash starting to feed a lava flow. And so that's one of the things that makes our volcanoes kind of unique. Our lavas, we have some of the hottest lavas on the planet. Some of the hottest lavas on the planet. And so when our big chunks land, they can still be kind of molten. We'll talk a little bit about that because I think this is a very specialized question, but also very relevant to some of the things we might have seen at some point. All right, next slide, please. Here are some more recent eruptions, right? A little bit more gas was involved in these, and can you hit the button so that we can... So here are some of our fountains from episode 34. And I want you to also pay attention, right? The scale is not the same. These are much taller. We have a lot finer particles that are being erupted out of these. It's easier to see it in the daytime. And don't worry, we have a couple more of these eruptions that are gonna play. And so we can see, like the Mauna Loa eruption, though, we're feeding lava flows because our material is still super hot and there's big enough collection of it that we're still feeding those lava flows that cover the caldera floor. And then finally, there's one more in there. I think we got, episode 36. That was the one that kind of, or is that 38? That 38. Okay, thank you. That took out V3. And so when we're looking at these different eruptions, our fountain heights, the taller they get, the smaller the fragments get. Although you're like, but you still have the big fragments. Well, some of those small fragments some of those big fragments will break apart and turn into small fragments. One of the reasons why we all had some tephra falling on our houses if we were in eastern part of Hawaii Island is because we had some pretty low level, like the Kona winds were blowing in this direction instead of out into the Ka'u Desert. And we also had some squirrely, the higher level winds, and that's what was kind of lofting and taking those big chunks of the really light frothy stuff into, out in the yard right here. I don't know if you all saw how much tephra's out there. There's a lot of it. All right, next slide, please. And then finally, we're gonna talk about tephra. We use a lot of different words to describe it. Maybe you don't even know what tephra is, and I've been using it this whole time. Next slide, please. So tephra is really anything that if it erupted at daytime and there was a shadow and it was cold, like it was kind of solid when it landed, I would call that tephra. Tephra is not necessarily a size-based word. The volcanic ash that you were talking about from Mount St. Helens, tephra. This massive Nerf ball looking bomb, or actually that's pretty small. I've had bigger things land at my house. That also tephra. Reticulite up here, tephra. It's not a cannonball. This is also tephra. All right, next slide, please. And so we might use different words though, and you might have seen these in volcano watches, or you might have heard some of our colleague scientists use tephra or ash or lapilli. There are actually specific sizes we associate with those words. And so blocks or bombs are anything over 2.5 inches. So How many of you had a bomb fall at your house? Yeah, right? It sounds more impressive when you phrase it that way. But was it a Manini kind of bomb or like, you know, big basketball-sized bomb? And so I think this is one of the, I feel like with geology we have a lot of different words and people can get bogged down in the language because if you're not, you know, if I'm out here speaking, you know, Spanish to you guys, well, it's the language that we, you know, use when we're talking about stuff in Spanish. And so I found it really hard as a student to kind of break through some of the language. And so it's not surprising if you've ever sat there going like, well, what's a lapilli? Because I've also heard of, you know, accretionary lapilli, which is, for those of you familiar with the 1790 eruption, it's almost like hail, which also fell on Saturday. Did anybody feel the hail on Saturday? Yep, Yvonne and I were out with another colleague from the USGS at one of the overlooks in the public viewing area, and hail fell on us. Like, all right, where's the fourth horseman? I was waiting. And so these sizes, so whenever you see these words, just know that there's a size associated with them, unless you hear other words. Like accretionary lapilli is a specific process, and so that's something that's that size with a specific process to it, and so it's just, you're adding more layers of difficulty into the language, but at their basis, they're really just size comparisons. And so most of what fell in people's yards that they would have noticed or saw was of the block and bomb size, which is actually very impressive, honestly. All right, next slide, please. And so there's different words we use to describe the different kinds of tephra. It's not just size. Some of it is how much gas is in there. And so it gets really complicated very quickly. This is from the private collection of my yard. So this big one is about a foot. I actually had one that was a little bit bigger than that, but I wanted to preserve that one for teaching purposes. And so you might hear the word pumice. And so pumice and reticulite are cousins. Reticulite is just the ultra frothy version of pumice. And so you need to have so much gas that it's no crystals and it just looks like a giant honeycomb. And so it's, you know, as a person that was on my roof, I was very appreciative that it was partially, I had a couple of pieces of true reticulite, but mostly pumice, but pumice that was close to being reticulite in gas content, because then I didn't have to replace my roof. And so pumice is effectively, you can think of it as like a soda foam, like a lava foam. Right? How many of you have ever had soda or watched somebody shake up a soda and then open the cap and watch the foam violently explode out? Well, to get back to the first bits of slide, that's just a decompression. That's a decompression sort of situation. And so the processes that are dictating where melt and magma form are just the same kind of processes that we're dealing with at the surface as well. It turns out it really is just chemistry and physics, so apologies if you were hoping to avoid chemistry and physics. It's been here the whole time. And so our reticulite is a really specific word though, and so if you've ever seen like the superfine honeycomb looking stuff, that's reticulite. Pumice, there are the white chocolate or the felsic versions of our basaltic pumice. You might have cleaned your feet with them or your bathroom. Maybe I would recommend having separate stones for both of those purposes. Don't clean your foot with your toilet pumice, but they're both, you know, they're good because they're abrading. You can use them for cleaning, that kind of stuff. Ours is a little bit less resilient though, and so I wouldn't recommend using our pumice for cleaning your feet, as I'm sure many of you have learned by getting pumice and glass slivers in your feet this week. Yeah. All right, next slide, please. Scoria and cinder. Maybe you've heard one of those words or either of those words. So it turns out scoria is just the same thing as cinder. Cinder is more the colloquial term that you might use, like unless you're talking about a cinder cone. Scoria cone and cinder cone are the exact same thing. Have any of you ever been to Flagstaff, Arizona? Yeah, right, driving through there's all those little tiny pu'u. How many of you have been on the Saddle Road? I've asked some of my students from Hilo, and they're like, I've never taken Saddle Road. Like, you must be lying to me. And so all those pu'u, right, it's the same kind of thing, these little fist-sized clasts. These tend to have a little bit more of a density than what was falling on Saturday. They can be red. That's just an oxidation sort of thing, like they're just getting a little bit rusty on the outside. You might recognize these from your driveway. I have them in my yard but when we got our house, there wasn't a fence, and so this was to keep the pigs from digging up the yard. So also good for that purpose as well. So cinder is just a colloquial term we have for scoria. Next slide, please. And then finally, right, we have Pele's hair and Pele's tears. This is my dog Klaus. He's a Newfoundland. And so when the eruption was happening on Saturday, oh, this will not do. We have to protect his sensitive little hooves. And so you can see our attempts to protect from that fine hair. It looks like hair, it looks like a weave. It's made of glass. And so if any of you have ever done the insulation with the absolute itchy, unavoidable kind of feeling, that's exactly what the Pele's hair feels like for those of you that haven't experienced it. And tears are just what happens when we have something that is so fluid, it acts almost more like a water than it would a different kind of material. Right? You're not getting those big giant holes in it like you would the reticulite. And so these are all just products that are kind of in the same family. But you can also step on a tear and that can feel quite unpleasant too. And so for those of you who, I can't tell you what you should or shouldn't be doing, but I prioritized making sure my dog's feet were taken care of because that can be pretty nasty for their feet, right? It's bad for ours, and they have all those grooves in there and whatnot, especially when your foot is the size of a horse hoof. So, and we also had the raincoat on him because, right, walking through his little jungle, you have all the Pele's hair that's in all the, falling off the trees every time it gets windy. And so we're waiting until it rains until we're going to be a little bit more relaxed about letting him back into his domain. All right, next slide, please. And then finally, spatter. Spatter is something that's super common around here. How many of you have been to Mauna Ulu? You have seen spatter. Everything that kind of looks like, it's a bit of gum that looks like it's glued to that other surface. That's just spatter. Many of you, I think, probably caught onto, can you hit next, please? So this is from earlier. Is this from August or October rather? And what happens is you can have spatter and cinders that kind of are so hot when they in place, they don't really lose their heat, and you can get them to start flowing again. So how many of you noticed some of this kind of stuff in some of our earlier episodes, like episode 28 or 29? That's not a new vent, right? Those are just those hot bits of spatter and a little bit of the cinders, the scoria, if you want to be scientific about it, kind of heating up to the point where like they're glomming together, and you get enough of that together, it's going to start to flow, right? Because if you have a small amount of peanut butter on an incline, maybe it doesn't start to flow. But if you have a giant vat of peanut butter and stick that same amount on there, right, it's the same viscosity, but you have enough of that density, the mass is just going to start to move down the hill a little bit. And in this case, that's just what was happening with our spatter. We have a fancy word, nerd word for that. It's called like a rheomorphic flow. But it's just a flow that is formed from not coming from a vent, just the remobilization of our spatter into a more fluid flow.
So it's still semi-liquidy, or how does it flow?
So yeah, it's got so much heat, right, that it's still pretty liquidy. And also if you have some really, really fine bubble walls, that's not, if you're near the kind of temperature where that starts to melt a little bit, you're not like blowtorching, you're not gonna melt this giant pot of it, but if things are primed to melt a little bit, you can start to get a kind of a critical mass, and then eventually you'll have enough of that semi-molten and molten material that it'll start to creep down thanks to gravity. Yeah, I got sent that video by a couple of people to explain this. What is this? Why is that happening? And so, figured I'd provide all of us with the information there. Does that answer your question though? Great. Next slide. Hey, guess what? We are perfect on time somehow. What did we talk about? I just talked to you for about 40 minutes. What did we do? Well, we talked about the fact that volcanoes don't just happen, right? We need things happening specifically in the crust to give us our melts, and that in turn dictates where our volcanoes are erupting. So the Ring of Fire has we have plate subducting. It's bringing water in. That is lowering the temperature we need to create melt, or in our case, we're sitting on top of a blowtorch, and so adding that heat is what gives us our melts. We have different flavors of magma or lava, right? Magma is just the underground version, and those are classified based on their chemistry. And so if we have more silica, we'll have a more kind of felsic or rhyolitic type of eruption, or granite countertop type of eruption. Each volcano can have a range of different behaviors, right? Kīlauea has had explosive eruptions in the past. We have big fountains now. We've had these kind of more, I would say, less energetic lava lakes I feel like our lava lakes right now are very energetic, but we had that 2008 through 2018 lava lake, Pu'uo'o lava lakes, and so we can have a wide range of different styles. And finally, right, the type of eruption that we have is very explosive. That will give us a different kind of product. And so I didn't really talk about lavas because I wanted to give you more time to ask me questions, but our lavas tend to be a little bit less explosive, although we can have these big fountains feeding lava flows. We saw a much more explosive end member, those Sakurajima or the Mount St. Helens. You can have lava flows happening after those eruptions, but you're not going to get the kind of syn eruptive or at the same time as the eruption lava flows. And so if you're interested, we have a whole degree for you, let me tell you. And Yvonne can tell you what we do if you have other questions about that from a student's perspective. Or David, we have several alum or future alum in our midst. Last slide, please, I swear. And so for those of you who are still looking for more information, these are official sources where you can find information about what to do with your catchment, about VOG. Even if you're not from here, I assume that you now know what VOG is if you were here yesterday. It was terrible up here. Or ash, or even episode 41, Katie wrote a really nice volcano watch, and that is up as of today, and so that can give you some more information. And I would rather answer your questions than talk, so let's open it up. What you got? Oh, did you call me professor? Oh, it feels so official.
Can you tell us what you know about the dependence or independence of the north and south vents during these episodes?
All right, so the question was, can you, because we have people listening online, so I'm just going to repeat the question. Can I let you know what I know about the independence or dependence of the north and south vents? And so when we're looking at some of the trends, right? A lot of geology is just identifying, can we see patterns in behavior? And one of the things that I think I've thought a little bit about is the fact that those vents are located in kind of the same area as one of the vents from the 2020 December eruption. And I don't mean 2024, I mean the first eruption after Kīlauea started refilling. And it's the same location as some of the vents from the September 2021 through December 2022 eruption. And so I think that those being north and south vents, I think it's a really shallow thing. I don't think that they're disconnected in a major way at any kind of appreciable depth. And when I say appreciable depth, I mean, a couple 100 meters tops, just based on whatever's been refilling. And so I think that they're pretty, like at depth, the plumbing is connected, but in terms of which one turns on and which one turns off, I think some of that might be a function of how clogged the vents are getting in between some of these activities, right? That was episode 38, when it looked like the ground, for lack of a better word, like unzipped. David, do you have a better phrasing for it? Like it looked like it unzipped. And so that was probably like a pressurization in the shared section where neither the north or the south vent could really maintain that eruption. And so, right, in order to make way for what needed to come out, you had to increase the size of one of the vents. And I think the south vent was maybe a little bit weaker at that time in terms of the ability to withstand the pressurization. But I think that they're connected. So we do a lot of chemistry at Hilo. When the building in 2018 was deemed unsafe, the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory, they moved down to Hilo, and some of them never left. And so a lot of the chemistry that gets done, every time you see like, oh, this is the magnesium, or this is the, what the olivines are doing, those are happening in a shared lab that we have at Hilo, and we share with the Volcano Observatory. And there's no chemistry difference between anything that's come out of the north and south vent. And so we're not seeing any chemistry differences. It's not a situation where it looks like it's tapping a different magma system or anything like that. I think they're connected, and it's just a fun little surface quirk that we are having two vents. Does that answer your question? David, do you have anything to add? Because you sit through those meetings more than I do, so. Okay, right on. What do we have in the front?
Okay, so I do some volunteer work with the park, and one of the questions that comes up when I'm talking to people and I talk about the diffusive versus explosive. And I mentioned that it was explosive between like about 1490 to 1790. Is how would we know if it's going to shift back into explosive mode?
So as I mentioned earlier, pattern recognition. You know, the past is the key to the future or the present. And so when we look at the geologic record, if you're looking at the Kanakakoi, you know, Kīlauea, there's big massive lava flow, explosive eruption. Well, 2,000 years ago, even bigger situation happening. And so, you know, large volume lava flow, somewhere explosive, you know, caldera forming eruption. And so not a caldera forming eruption, that's not, you know, the caldera is emptying, and like the gap that's left over is what forms the bigger hole. And so in the geologic record, we've noticed big lava flow, explosive, you know, bits afterwards. And that's what, you know, we were looking at when I wasn't here at the time, but, you know, we as in my colleagues at the USGS, so them, they were, you know, looking at that going, well, this has been the pattern the last couple of times. Guess we got to wait and see. But when we're looking at the size of the collapse we had in 2018, right, it's called Hulahia, an overturning. This is very disruptive, very, very disruptive. Even though I didn't live here at the time, I had lived here in 2012, 2013, and so I still knew a bunch of people here, you know, oh my goodness, another earthquake, you know, this is the, I don't know, the 30th one this month, and we're 30 days into the month, so we get like one a day. And it turns out though, even though that felt super big, that was a pretty small collapse at the summit. And so maybe it has something to do with that. One of the lines of thinking was, well, there's water at the, you know, the summit now, and maybe if we add lava to that water, that'll increase the explosivity. There's a different, that Sirtzian eruption that I mentioned earlier when I was talking about the styles, that is just a situation where you have magma interacting with water, and you can get a kind of more violent explosion there. And so that was one of the concerns, and so in the geologic record, you can't find a water lake necessarily, but if you go to like the story of Pele and the Mo'olelo around, you know, Pele coming and finding her home, she talks about Pele and Hi'iaka fighting, and so trying to drown Pele's fires. And so in the oral history, there is, you know, records of there's been a water lake up there. And so after that, we had some explosive eruptions. And so right now, correct me if I'm wrong, David, but I don't think that there's any, you know, dead ringer or like a specific thing that can be like, yes, we are now going to transition to an explosive eruption until it kind of starts happening. I don't know, would you disagree with that, David? Sorry. He's our representative from the USGS, and so. But yeah, the oral histories are helpful in, you know, letting us know what was happening at the time of the last collapse, and luckily we did not transition into the same kind of explosive style. All right, other questions? Oh, so I'm gonna, this gentleman first, and then you, and then you, is that okay? Is that fair? Well, we're doing it that way. Sir, go for it. I love curious. The question was, what goes into the models that USGS uses for the forecast? And I know that it was more pointed than, like, not in a bad way pointed, but it was more pointed than that, but for the people listening, that's the kind of answer we're gonna get.
You know, you can create just statistical models that are based on the past, and you try to figure that out. Or you can actually simulate it using numerical methods. And I don't know what they're doing.
The question is the answer is all of the above. So we have a series of 3 primary models that we use to generate the forecasts that we put in our updates of the activity. And to be honest, this particular eruption is it's uniquely cyclical and consistent. So even though we are able to make measurements of especially how the ground is moving, and I'll speak to more about that in a minute. So we have a very capable and expansive monitoring network, and that's part of the equation. But also it's the particulars of this particular eruption that allow us to generate a forecast that has usually been accurate lately to within a couple of days or even a day. And so there are 3 different versions that we primarily use. One is a spreadsheet that our scientist in charge, Ken Hahn, put together. And it is we look at data from our tilt meters. And so a lot of this is we're looking at in between the lava fountain episodes, more magma is coming in to recharge the system before the next one comes along. And our tilt meters are able to measure the rate of inflation of the summit. And so basically we take that rate, and so you can draw the lines, like Liz says, we love to look at patterns, and we love to draw lines. And to your point about as more time goes on, the forecasts get better, that's because you have more samples, more data points. And so you can have more lines to draw. And so,
basically a statistical model.
yes, and so you look at the rate, but also the rate of change of that rate. So there's a first derivative and second derivative involved. So that's kind of the most simplistic way. Ingrid Johansson, one of our geodetic geophysicists, she has more sophisticated models that she runs in a program called MATLAB. And then she looks at observations from multiple tilt meters that we have, and it takes some other assumptions about the properties of the ground and the behavior of the magma and whatnot. And so hers runs a series of various models, and then when they start to converge, that is another way of doing the forecast. And then there's a geophysicist at California Volcano Observatory, Kyle Anderson, who has a similar but different way of doing it. So we kind of use those three things together. This eruption is so consistent that Ken's is the one. It's really simple. We plug it into Excel, and it works very well. Where it starts to break down is when there are deviations from just a simple reinflation to the start of the next episode. And if people have noticed, it's great that you mentioned tilt meter. A lot of people now see our tilt meters, and you can see our data. And it's great because we hear from people in the public and around the world saying, hey, I'm watching the Ue Kahuna tilt meter, the UW tilt meter, and it's been doing this. What's going on with that? So it's not a perfect ramp every single time. There are these little fluctuations that will affect the forecast.
You'll see them as overflows too.
Yes.
Like once we start to have overflows, that tilt will kind of drop off a little bit. Yep.
And so sometimes it'll come later because of that, because it's relieving some of the pressure, or sometimes it'll come early. But to answer your question about the forecast, it's primarily the tilt meter data and the consistent behavior of this particular eruption that are letting us do it. But then there's a whole lot of work going on using more sophisticated numerical models like what you were describing, trying to account for a lot more variables. So that's going on in the background too, but that's more on the research side. Yeah. So that was a very long answer to a simple question.
Of course. So I love that question because I posited how do you measure a fountain to my students, and I made them go outside and I'm like, measure this tree. Oh, thank you for asking that. So how do you measure fountain height? How do you measure fountain height? Yeah.
What's the baseline?
Yeah, what are you measuring it from? And so it is, right, the top, the morphology changes a little bit between each of the eruptions. So sometimes you'll notice you'll have the overflows and things will stack up a little bit. You get the more narrow nozzle. And so it's whatever the top part of where we can see the lavas coming out of. And it's usually reasonably flat, so you're not gonna have a completely, a 40-meter difference between this part right here and right next to it. And so it's kind of wherever the lava's coming out of. And then to measure the top, I think, is a much more difficult question. Yeah, and so when I had them measure the tree, I was like, measure this tree, guys. How tall is this tree? It's one of them big trees, too. And when I asked them to do it, it wasn't intentional, but there was no shadow, and so they couldn't even use trig. The way that the USGS does it, and I will speak to this because this is something I do help with, and so, right, I don't make those models. I can talk to you about them, but David's a better person. But I think I've taken more fountain height measurements than you, so I'm going to take this one. So we use something when we're in the field called a laser rangefinder. And so if I am here, right, and we'll use the tripod. Well, the tripod's below me, so I'll shoot to the tripod below me, and then you can shoot to the top part. What counts as the top of the fountain? Well, when we look at fountains, and actually, can I have you go all the way back to that fountain video? So you're gonna just keep hitting back like 30 times. Actually, yeah, keep going back, keep going back, keep going back. All right, go forward one. And hit forward one more time. Yeah, perfect. And so when we're looking at this, It is not necessarily just what's glowing. And so once it gets to the daytime, I'll do this so I don't poke the screen. We'll wait a second. And so when we look at how that fountain's dying out, you can see the black stuff at the top. Some of that is getting carried up into above the volcano, above the fountain, because it's no longer being propelled out by the force of the jetting. It's actually being carried through these thermals that are rising upwards and then dumping it onto my house. And so that's not the top of the fountain, even though the material traveled up in that direction. We are using the top of like the kind of dense, the optically dense part of the fountain. So for us, and I'm really short, so I'm going to do my best, the fountain top would be about here. It might not include all the kind of fine dusty particles, partly because that's not necessarily being jetted out in that sort of way, and it's also harder to get a measurement off of that. And so for a variety of reasons, that's one of the ways that we do it, at least when we're in the field. We also have a bunch of webcams put around, not just the ones that you're like logging into, like, ooh, what's it doing? Overflows, 2 more days, no problem. We have still cameras that are taking a photo at certain intervals, and actually one of our students was doing some of the work to measure the fountain heights. And so like Ingrid guys, he has a little program and identifying the top of the fountain, and so he uses like I would say probably 1,000 frames for a single fountain where he is measuring the changes in the height as a function of time. And so a lot of it is the look angle, because if I am looking at the fountain from here versus here, like in your brain it should be the same, but it's not just moving up and down. It'll look at different height if you're at different angles. And so we use a variety of different camera looks to try and get the most accurate measurement. And so there is some interpretation, like where is the fountain height, but we try and use the optically dense top of the fountain because we can be sure that that is what is being carried, that's coherent. We can check that with our laser rangefinder as well as with the videos. And it's also, we know that that is still being kind of carried there from the propulsion of the fountain itself and not just the hot air bringing things to dump here on the Volcano Art Center. All right, thank you so much.
And so that was our Volcano Awareness Month. The last presentation that they did, it was quite an exciting Volcano Awareness Month because this year we had a whole year of episodes going on, Phil. And I don't know, all the years that we've covered these together, we have not had this opportunity to have a year's worth of episodes like this.
It's been quite a lot in the last year. I think about it, really, right? It's what, in 1 year time, about 35 events or something like that. Yeah, like close to 40 events.
Right.
We've, like the year before that, we're like, wow, we had 3 eruptions in 1 year. 3 in 1 year. Has that ever happened before? Right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's a whole another level, a whole other order of magnitude there. It's really,
when I look back over the years, I listened to her talk tonight. I was kind of just reflecting a little bit over the last 42 events. And in these 42 events, we have covered so many different things happening, whether it was VOG or the Tephra that's been flying around, the highest fountain record. We've covered the closures of different areas in the park, the different experiences that the local community has experienced, whether it's Kau, Ocean View, and helping them prepare for what may be coming later and what's going on right now. It has been one of those years that we've been waiting for, but now that we're in it, it's how do we keep giving the community more information? And we just did a disaster preparedness event in partnership with Civil Defense here and HVO and NPS, and we reached out to the community and trying to get questions out to them and get some answers and feedback on what would help you as a community respond better to these types of situations. So if you guys are watching, put it in our comments below, put it in our chat, send us an email, let us know, because that's what we're here for. Our whole mission as a community-based nonprofit organization is to get this type of information out to you and prepare you for what may be coming next.
Yeah, so yeah, that's really interesting, and we can keep, really, as Liz said, everyone who lives here has really become a volcanology expert on Kīlauea in particular, right? Because you have to be living with it, right? So it's really interesting. I think I think about how that makes us all more connected to the land, to the natural processes, all those things like that. There's other benefits besides preparedness as well. But really, when it comes down to it, there's a lot of people who are moving to this island. This island's, well, we all know like how bad the traffic is, how long the lines are getting. You look at the statistics, and the whole state of Hawaii has been losing population, but not our island. Our island's been growing in population. And so there are people who arrive here, maybe your new neighbors. They need to know this stuff also. Maybe they are starting from nothing, right? And so really our mission is not to just educate one or two of you, but our whole community to come up together, right? And so that way we can have our, as we've referred to, our little army. When something does happen, we can all together mobilize and know how to educate and prepare and be resilient against whatever happens and comes next. So yeah, it's really been incredible. It's really been an incredible run since 2018. Like the range of things we've seen, going further back to the ocean entry days of Kalapana. I mean, it's really hard to imagine more variability in a short amount of time than we've really been lucky to experience here. So I'm really thankful for that. So yeah, that's a wrap on 2026 Volcano Awareness Month. Really fantastic. Thanks for filming those, Lou, and
all of us. We all covered. It takes all three of us to do the whole month, right?
And speaking of that, there is another video will be coming at some point that we can share with you guys about the 75 tsunami stories, right? So we have some more content coming. I think you'll have some other clips as well that we'll put out. But officially, no more in-person events. We'll just keep trickling out things as we have a chance to between episodes, since that's the most exciting thing happening for us here today. So you've been teasing the dogs, Lou? What's going on with the dogs?
I've been teasing. I got them loaded up here for you. Hold on, kids. Here they come. So as we do in the community corner, we throw up our AI. As last night we went out, the three of us, Dane, Phil, and I, and we went to our science night, and we put on our traveling volcano toolkit, where we teach the community, the kids of the community, about volcanoes and viscosity. That's what we set up. We also been setting up our AI literacy lab that we built this last year. And with that, I have some AI for you guys tonight. And because I say that the water stations at the park are limited, you need to bring your own. And the park says that, NPS says safety is your responsibility. And we always like to throw up a little AI video for you guys. Here is your dog video. There it is.
With the synchronized sound.
Sweet. Yes.
Yeah.
even with the tephra sound in there. We'll go one more time. And how fitting that Liz had her dog on there tonight, which her dog is huge. Her dog showed up at the event. The dog is huge. So, there you guys go. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you for all your donations and supporting us and just watching the videos and hanging out with us on Thursday nights at 5 p.m. Hawaii Standard Time. Keep your questions coming. Don't be afraid to send us an email. We'll get your questions answered as best we can and here live if we can. That's all I got for us, Phil. Take us out of here.
Yeah, thanks, Lou. Yeah, so yeah, until next week. We're nonprofit HVERI, the Hawaiian Volcano Education and Resilience Institute. For Lou Tori, I'm Philip Ong. Aloha, everybody.